Tibet is widely known for its association with Buddhist practice. Tibetan monks are well-respected scholars in the global community, and the Dalai Lama is held in very high esteem by Buddhists and non-Buddhists alike. Though, for many, connecting Tibet with Buddhism is a natural alliance, a deeper look into Tibetan history reveals that this connection was not always present. During the time of the Tibetan Empire, there were 3 kings who were responsible for bringing Buddhist practice to Tibet: King Songtsen Gampo, King Trisong Detsen, and King Relbachen introduced Buddhism to the Tibetan people, built monasteries and temples, and were responsible for translating the Dharma into the Tibetan language. Without the contributions of these kings, Tibet may not have the rich history in Buddhism that it does today. I will first outline the history of the Tibetan Empire with regard to Buddhist practice. I will then focus on the life and contributions of each king individually. For all intents and purposes, ancient Tibetan history and Buddhist history are indivisibly associated. The history of Tibet is closely connected with the Buddhist life. A common practice in Tibetan texts is to overlay historical events with Buddhist significance. An event did not just occur, rather it occurred to demonstrate part of the Buddhist doctrine. This combination of doctrine and history expresses the idea of different truths. There are different truths in Tibetan history depending on which meaning a person is trying to convey. Historical truths are only relevant when they have applicable meaning. An example of these different truths can be found in the pre-Buddhist and post-Buddhist versions of the Tibetan creation story. According to the pre-Buddhist view, before humanity existed, the land of Tibet was filled with Mi-Ma Yin, or non-human ones, such as spirits and demons. Through the breaking of the cosmic egg, the first 6 tribes were created, and thus the first generation of Tibetans was born. The cosmic egg bears significance in relation to Tibetan geography. The white of the egg represents the white of the lake. The fragments of the shell represent the glacier mountains, and the yolk of the egg represents the 6 tribes that were born. The post-Buddhist creation story varies greatly from the theory of the cosmic egg. According to this view, the Tibetan people owe their existence to the union of an ogress and an ape. While the ape sat in silent meditation, the ogress became enamored of him. She threatened to kill herself if he did not mate with her. The ape did not want to break meditation or cause harm to the ogress, so he asked the bodhisattvas Tere and Avalokitesvara for advice. They told the ape to marry the ogress. This advice is representative of Buddhist compassion. The ape broke meditation to marry the ogress rather than allow her to harm herself. Out of the union of the ape and the ogress came 6 offspring, representative of each of the 6 realms of existence: hell beings, hungry ghosts, animals, men, jealous deities, and gods. This second version of the creation story is more consistent with the widely held Tibetan belief that Tibet was destined to be a land of people following the Buddha's path. Though history paints Tibet as a land of Buddhist followers, the first appearance of the written doctrine of Buddhism did not appear until approximately 233 CE during the reign of King Totori Nyentsen. According to Tibetan legend, a Buddhist text fell from the sky through the roof of the king's palace. No one understood what the text said at first because it was written in Sanskrit. The king sensed that the text was of much importance, however, and he hid it away so that it may be read in the future. The Tibetan people did not have any more exposure to the written texts of Buddhism until the 6th century, when the Tibetan Empire expanded into Buddhist lands. By the early part of the 6th century, the Yarlung dynasty had already begun to build Tibet into a military power. The Tibetan army conquered and annexed large areas of Central Asia that were located between Tibet and China, areas that were mostly inhabited by nomadic and semi-nomadic tribes. The Tibetan Empire continued to expand, and soon the army dominated most of Nepal. This domination worried the Arab caliph, who feared that his empire would be attacked. In response, the caliph formed an alliance with the Chinese emperor in order to combat the Tibetan army. This alliance would later serve as a hindrance to the expansion of the Tibetan Empire. In 635 CE, Tibet attacked and gained control of large parts of China. At the time, China and Tibet were both major powers fighting for domination of the Asian lands. Though they were on relatively equal footing diplomatically, Tibet had a distinct military advantage, which allowed its control over parts of China. Due to this Chinese contact, and in addition to contact with the other lands it had conquered, Tibet had its first real involvement with Buddhist practice. The Tibetan people were surrounded on all sides by Buddhist civilizations, and they developed a natural affinity for Buddhism. According to some Buddhist philosophers, Tibet served as an ideal location to develop the Buddhist faith. Quote, Tibet was destined to become one of the greatest Buddhist cultures ever to develop. The high elevation of the Himalayas created an atmosphere of calm and quiet. Within that isolation enforced by nature, the mind tended naturally to be more peaceful, able to concentrate and think more clearly without distraction or disturbance. Such are the perfect conditions or environment for the practice of meditation. End quote. For many Buddhists in the 6th century, however, Tibetan soldiers were a feared enemy. The soldiers ransacked Buddhist institutions in the land that they conquered, killing and torturing several monks. Their victims called them red faces in reference to the red ochre that soldiers painted on their faces before attacking. Tibetans were as savage and brutal as any other soldiers representing an empire. It was not until the influence of the 3 Dharma kings that Buddhism was truly prevalent in Tibetan society. The 3 Dharma kings are the 3 Tibetan leaders who are associated with first bringing Buddhism into Tibetan life. The first of the kings, Songtsen Gampo, lived from approximately 618 to 650 CE and ascended the throne at the age of 13. Many Tibetan Buddhists presently consider him to have been the incarnation of the Bodhisattva Avalokitesvara, who chose rebirth as a king in order to further the spread of the Dharma. In one Tibetan legend, Songtsen Gampo was born with an outgrowth on the crown of his head. This outgrowth was bright and full of luster, but the king covered it with a red head wrap. According to the legend, the outgrowth was a symbolic representation of the king's connection with the Buddha. Songtsen Gampo had 2 wives that deeply influenced his connection with Buddhism, Brukti and Wencheng. The king chose both of his wives for the same reason. He wanted to make political alliances with Nepal and China. His first wife, Brukti, was the daughter of the king of Nepal and a devout Buddhist. His second wife, Wencheng, was the daughter of the Chinese emperor. The emperor refused to let Songtsen Gampo marry his daughter at first, but when Gampo took over the emperor's city, he soon complied. Wencheng was also a devout Buddhist, and together the 2 wives influenced the king to build numerous Buddhist temples throughout Tibet. Some historians also credit these 2 women with converting the king to Buddhism, though other historians disagree as to whether or not the king actually ever did convert to Buddhist practice. Tibetan Buddhists consider both wives to have been the incarnations of the Bodhisattva Tere, who chose these forms in order to provide suitable mates for Songtsen Gampo. Upon recognizing the virtue associated with Buddhist practice, Songtsen Gampo formulated 16 rules of public conduct for his people. They were: number 1, those who kill, steal, or commit adultery will be fined, otherwise punished, or banished from the country. Number 2, take refuge in the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. Number 3, carry on the social tradition of respecting your parents and the elders of the community. Number 4, practice non-violence, live without hostility and resentment, and respect those who bring out the wholesomeness in themselves and others. Number 5. Show genuine friendliness to all, especially relatives and friends, and encourage them when they are in need of support. Number 6. Be as helpful to your fellow citizens as you would have them be to you. Number 7. Be unassuming and straightforward in your speech by being honest and not evasive.